We're continuing our summer sermon series on the book of Revelation. And as we get into these next couple of weeks, we're going to come across some of the most famous symbols from the book of Revelation, the idea of the seals and the horsemen. And so I wanted to take a moment to kind of deconstruct these symbols and point out what I think are fundamental misunderstandings about what these symbols represent. When we read Revelation or when we talk about Revelation or we see depictions in popular media of Revelation, something like Left Behind or something akin to that, they usually function with this idea that Revelation is strictly a futuristic, predictive text, that it's laying out this roadmap for the end of the world. When in reality, Revelation is just as much a pulling back of the curtain so that the people of God can see the present reality all around us, to understand God's work of redemption throughout time and space and history, and to hope for and anticipate the day when Christ ushers in the new creation. And so it's not just some futuristic roadmap to how the world's going to end. It's showing us the reality of the world all around us and the reality of God's reign and sovereignty through his Christ in the world all around us. And so this book is ultimately good news. But when we read it the other way, and we sensationalize this book, we take something like the seals, the seven seals in Revelation 5, 6, 7, and 8, and we take something like the horsemen and we turn them into these objects of fear or distress, when in reality, the picture that's being painted is ultimately one of hope and building anticipation and joy and perseverance for the day when Christ calls us home into the promise that is waiting for us. And so let's go back to Revelation 5, and we get this image of the Lamb. And the Lamb who is described as being worthy to open the scroll and break its seals. And again, that kind of betrays one of the other misunderstandings about the seals themselves. When you read about the seals and them being opened, it's not this idea that when the seals are opened by the Lamb is somehow unleashing some new horror upon the earth. That's not it at all. Instead, think of it more like if you have a document and you want to keep the contents of the document hidden, you might use wax and a signet impression to seal the document, right? So what that seal does is it designates that it comes from an authority, it's been authenticated, and it signifies to the world around that the recipient, there's a sole recipient who is allowed to open this document and to reveal the contents of this document. You can think of this in like a legal sense. If there's a sealed document, it means only a select number of people are allowed to read what's in that document. In the use of the image here, the vision here, only the Lamb is allowed to read and reveal what is within this scroll, right? These are the heavenly realities and the truths and God's purpose and his plan for all of creation. And only the Lamb can reveal this. And so it's not new things being unleashed. It's truths that have been present in the world around us since the beginning of mankind. But now Jesus, the Lamb, who is worthy, is revealing these things to us, to his church. And so before we get into the seals themselves, there's a song that's sung to the Lamb, and it goes like this. This is from Revelation 5, verse 9. Worthy are you to take the scroll, to open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. That idea of blood, ransoming the people of God or sparing the people of God. It takes you back to the Exodus, to the Passover, to Moses, this idea of the lamb, the Passover lamb who was slain, and his blood was marked on the doorposts. And so the Israelites were spared from the angel of death who brought the judgment of God upon the people in the land of Egypt. And so this same idea of the mark or the sealing of the lamb's blood is going to apply to a future image in this text when it talks about the 144,000 who are sealed by God. It's the same idea. They're sealed by the blood of the Lamb. They're marked, they're preserved, they're designated, they're authenticated to be worthy of the Lamb's salvation. The song continues, And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. And so there's a promise in here, and kind of setting us up to understand where this text is going, that as we get into the seals, we're going to see the ground view of what it looks like for judgment and for suffering and for the consequences of sin in a broken world to be present in the world around us. Things like death, destruction, chaos, disease, evil empire, social injustice, economic inequity. We're going to see those realities, and we experience those realities in the world around us all the time. But kind of underneath all of this, or if you take a step back and you look from the heavenly perspective, you're filled with this hopeful message that the Lamb is reigning, the Lamb is triumphant, and that even as these things are taking place, we know that the Lamb has marked his own and he will preserve them through all of these things. And so it's with that in mind that I want to get into the seals themselves and talk about it just a little bit. So the first seal, and I want you to note what happens at the beginning of each of these horsemen entering the picture. Chapter 6, verse 1. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow. So the rider doesn't come, it can't come until it is invited to come. That means that these things, which are terrible and horrifying and are unfortunate realities of life on this earth in the presence, in the consequence of sin, they are things that are not beyond God's sovereign control. It's this idea and this promise that even when things feel beyond control, when they feel totally chaotic and totally terrifying, that God still reigns and that the Lamb still reigns. And so they say, "Come," and then the rider comes. And he had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. And we live in a world, in a history, mankind's history is littered with these kingdoms, these peoples that conquer and are conquered. You think of all the different kingdoms throughout the biblical narrative, going all the way back to Egypt, and then you have Assyria, who conquered the northern kingdom Israel, and you have Babylon, who conquered the southern kingdom Judah. And Babylon was conquered by Persia, and Persia was ultimately succeeded by the Seleucid dynasty, and the Seleucid dynasty by the Greeks, and the Greeks by the Romans. And it's John who's writing this, and he's in the occupation of the Roman world in Jerusalem and all throughout the known world at that time. And so again, this idea of conquest is not a new idea. It's not something that the Lamb's unleashing. It's this revelation of how things are in this present reality, but with the hope and the promise that Jesus still reigns, that he is worthy, that he is opening the seals to reveal to us God's greater plan. The second seal. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Again, this invitation, this recognition that there is still authority even as these things are ravaging our world. And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. The absence of peace, this idea of distress and violence against one another, not a new thing in our world. We unfortunately experience this reality all the time. And so we get to the third seal. And again, the third living creature says, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." The image here is of scales that are out of balance, of social injustice or economic inequity. This idea that we live in this world, in these systems that are fundamentally broken, where people are not able to access the means and the resources that they need, that we live in systems that are oppressive to some people and debilitating to other people. And so we experience economic injustice all the time, or we see it happening to people around us all the time. This is not a new reality. It's part of the sinful reality of how the world has always been. The fourth seal, verse 7. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. So death and Hades, not new. All of us have experienced the consequence, the brutality of death, the reality of death in our family and our loved ones, amongst our friends. We all live with this pressing and difficult to swallow understanding that death comes for each of us, and there's no escaping it. And yet we recognize that the Lamb who was slain is the Lamb who was raised, and so it's the hope and the promise that He rules over all things, even in the midst of the world falling to pieces, that anchors us in a sure and steadfast hope. The fifth seal. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And they were given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete. So this idea of martyrdom, of suffering for our faith, of being persecuted and hated, of maybe even being subjected to death, this is not a new reality. It certainly wasn't a new reality for John, who was living in exile for his faith, or for his brothers, the apostles, most of whom had by this point been violently put to death for their witness. And so John is not writing about something new. He's writing about the tragedy of the world around him, but he's doing it from a place of hope and faith. The sixth seal. I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as a sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree shed its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath had come, and who can stand? So very stereotypically apocalyptic imagery, this idea that there will be this great reckoning, this great day of judgment when the Lamb does return, when He returns in triumph, and He judges the whole world, and He judges all the sin of all of mankind. But it ultimately leads into this interruption before the seventh seal is opened, that gives us this vision of the 144,000 of Israel who are sealed. Again, numerology, this is not literally 144,000 people. That would be way too few in the scale of the history of the faithful people of God. But you think of the importance of 12 and 1,000 as this idea of completeness or wholeness. And so don't take the number and make it literal. Think of it as encompassing all the faithful of God, not just of ancient Israel or covenant Israel, but of the church throughout all of time and space. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the four angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then it's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And you notice that Judah is given first designation because the Lion of Judah, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, comes from the line of Judah. And so this idea of God's people being sealed, they are sealed, they're marked by the worthiness of the Lamb. We are sealed by our baptism, by the identity we have received in this covenant promise from God. And the idea is, in the midst of all this suffering and persecution and injustice and warfare, disease, even death, we know that we are sealed, which means we are preserved by the work of God through His Son, Jesus Christ. And that fundamentally gives us hope. And that's the message we need to be preaching when we talk about Revelation, when we talk about these visions, not of trying to instill this great sense of fear or uncertainty, especially in the people who are attending our services, but instead instill them with this sense of hope and triumph that comes from the seal that Christ has given us in our baptismal identity. And then we get into this vision of the great multitude from every nation. And so it moves from this symbolic number of 144,000 to this uncountable number of people, this immense number of people that John can't even begin to conceptualize, that's made up of every nation, every tribe. And it's this beautiful reality that through the work of Jesus, God is reconciling people from all backgrounds, all places of the world. He's reconciling them to himself through his son, Jesus Christ. And so as we get into Revelation, as we get into these symbols that are so often misunderstood, so often taken out of context, so often sensationalized and used to instill in people this sense of fear, my hope and my prayer is that when you read this book, when you read these symbols, you're able to make a little bit of sense of them. And most importantly, when you read them, you're filled not with fear, but with hope and with the promise of what Christ has done and how he's victorious, even as we experience the consequences of the sinful world all around us. And that hope anchors you for eternity. And so God bless you. I hope you will continue to read Revelation and join us for our sermon series every Sunday throughout the summer. And I hope to see you this Sunday in worship. God bless you.